Morgan Housel, welcome to the Mel Robbins podcast.
Thanks for having me, Mel. Happy to be here.
I am so glad you're here. Thank you for jumping on a plane. I'm a huge fan. I got to give a shout out to my husband, Christopher Robbins, because he was the one who first introduced me to your work. The Psychology of Money changed my life. I am so excited for your new blockbuster, The Art of Spending Money. And we're going to get into all the takeaways from your mega bestsellers. But I wanted to start by asking you, Morgan, if you could speak directly to the person who is here spending time together with us right now and share with them what could be different about their life or the life of somebody that they care about, that they share this episode with, if they take everything to heart that you're about to share with us and teach us today and apply it to their life.
I think it would be that your ability to feel wealthy, to feel rich, to be financially independent is absolutely in your control. It doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, how much money you make, what your job is, you can do it. And I think we've told ourselves for generations that in order to become rich, you have to have the right educational background, you have to have the right career, you have to come from the right family. And I don't think it's true. It's not about how smart you are. It's about how you think about money. It's about how you behave. And behavior is in everybody's control.
I don't know why I believe you, but I do.
That's good.
I literally, no matter how in debt you are, no matter how old you are, you can learn. And that's kind of one of the big lessons I'm going to talk about that I've distilled from your work that has changed my life and my relationship with money and the way I think about money, the way I save it, the way I spend it. It doesn't matter the starting point at all. Lesson number one that I've learned from you is you can get good with money. You believe that?
I've seen it time and time again, and there are so many examples of it. Let me give you this example here. An ordinary person doesn't have a good education. Maybe they didn't even graduate high school, let's say, but they have good financial behavior. They can think long-term. They can keep their expectations in check. They're patient. They have those behavioral qualities. That person can do very well. But the person who went to Harvard and got an MBA and went to work on Wall Street has the best education, the best connections, the best experience. That person can easily go broke, and they do. Not uncommon for that to happen. And that is not true in other fields. It is impossible to think of an ordinary person who didn't go to high school, didn't go to college, performing open heart surgery better than a Harvard-trained doctor. That's impossible. That will never happen. But it does happen with money because it's not about what you know. You don't need to know the secret formulas. You don't need to have secret connections. If you just get your behavior right and your thinking right, you can do well. Patience, keeping your expectations in check, not comparing yourself to other people, using money as a tool to live a better life instead of a yardstick to measure yourself against others by. It's very simple stuff, and it's all in your head. And I think it's 99% of what people need to know to do well with money is in your control.
Well, I think one of the mistakes that I made for a very long time, particularly before I bumped into your work, is I believed that there was some secret formula, that there was some private club for rich people, that it was about who you know, where you went to school. And what I love about your work is that you basically say, no. You're focusing on the wrong stuff. There are actual behaviors that we can learn that will help you get good with money.
Exactly. And they're not that difficult either. They're in your control. It's not to say that they're easy, but they're simple. And so just a couple of the behaviors. If you have an ability to focus internally on your own goals rather than constantly comparing yourself against others, if you can save a little bit of your money, live even slightly below your means, invest that money and be patient. Just those things, that's a kindergarten list of topics that I just gave you. It's not a bunch of Greek formulas. It's not a bunch of Wall Street gibberish. It's not a bunch of acronyms. These are very simple things, and that's it. Part of this, too, is redefining what I mean by financially successful. I'm not talking private islands and private jets, but for most people, what they actually want, if you said, what is your ultimate financial goal? They would say, I want to have a stable housing for myself and my family. I want to have a little bit of cushion to fall back onto if I were to get laid off or have a medical emergency. I want to be able to have a dignified retirement someday. I want to be able to spend time with my kids. Those are very good financial goals. And that level of wealth and success, I think, is within everybody's control.
Well, you said you wanted to teach us how to use money as a tool.
Yes.
To live a better life versus using it as a yardstick.
To measure yourself against others by.
Correct. And that's one of the core things you're going to teach us how to do and why this is so important today.
Of course. And it's easier said than done. It is so natural for everybody to compare yourself against others. For me to measure my level of success by not saying, what do I have? But by saying, what do I have relative to that guy? Not how comfortable is my house, but by saying, how big is my house relative to that person over there, to my neighbor, to my coworker, to my siblings. And one of the problems that makes it more difficult today than it's ever been is that it used to be for my parents' generation, my grandparents' generation, when they compared themselves to other people, it was relative to their neighbors or their coworkers. It was a pretty small group of people, maybe a couple people who you saw on TV or heard about on the radio. But now today, just everybody, including myself, their comparison group is the most sophisticated algorithm on Instagram or TikTok. And so no matter how well you're doing, no matter how great your house is, no matter how much money you're making, you turn on Instagram 100 times a day like everybody else, you open it up, and there is somebody out there who looks better, happier, more successful, more beautiful than you are. And so this topic, I think, has always been true. It's always been important. It is more important today than it's ever been. The idea of keeping your expectations in check, because it's easier today than it's ever been to let your expectations just spiral out of control. I see this with my own kids, my 9-year-old son. When I was growing up, normal people drove old pickup trucks and rich people drove new pickup trucks. That was like the definition in my head. Like if you had a new pickup truck, like, oh, there's a rich person. My son, who's 9, his definition of rich is like a private jet and a private island. Because he watches Mr. Beast and it's like, oh, sit in the circle and you win $1 million kind of thing. It's a completely different level of expectations than even I had 20 or 30 years ago. And so
And the hardest thing you're going to have is that even though you're one of the most compelling financial experts on the planet, your kids won't listen to you, Morgan.
No, of course not. Of course not. No.
I think that's a really important place to start because you have already dropped so many takeaways. And one of them was developing a skill set of looking inside yourself for what matters rather than looking outside yourself at Mr. Beast or what's on the social algorithm or what your neighbor is driving for that yardstick. But you did mention this sense that you're falling behind.
Yeah.
And so many people today in particular are feeling like they're falling behind. I mean, we have a 26-year-old and a 24-year-old, and they are already feeling as though, okay, I'm not making enough money. And how am I ever going to buy a house? And how am I going to pay for a life? If the person listening has that sense that they're falling behind, particularly if you're older, and you say it's too late, like I've already blown it, Morgan, what do you want them to hear right now?
I think there's a couple of things. One is empathy, because there are areas in life where particularly a lot of people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s are falling behind relative to previous generations, particularly something like home ownership, where it was more attainable in previous generations than it has been, particularly in the last couple of years. So empathy, this is not me saying, oh, you should just feel better. You should just be more grateful for what you have. You actually are doing fine. There is some empathy that has to be involved here.
And also for people that thought they were going to be able to retire at a certain age, and then the cost of living has gone up so much, or medical bills are at a certain state that you're realizing, oh my God, I don't have enough money to be able to retire. And so it is important to basically go, these are very real feelings that people have right now. And so if we start with empathy, where do we go next, Morgan?
Well, I think you start with empathy because if somebody feels like they're falling behind, that's their truth. But I think it's important to realize too that all happiness is just the gap between expectations and reality.
All right, say that again. All happiness
is the gap between expectations and reality. You have the life you're living, you have the life you expect to live. In between there is where you can find some level of happiness. And the wider that gap is, the more miserable you're going to feel.
Okay, so let's talk about somebody who is in a situation where they thought they would be further along with their savings and they're starting to panic because they're worried that their money's going to run out before they die or they're not going to be able to retire. How do you use that happiness definition right now if that's the reality?
This is not true for everybody. This is not black and white, but there are a lot of these cases, I would say the majority of these cases, where the reason that person has not been able to save as much as they thought is because their expectations for many years probably have been spiraling out of control. And they were spending more money than they should have been because they were trying to chase who they wanted to be, even if it wasn't necessarily the level of lifestyle that they could afford. And so they were renting an apartment that was very nice because they had an expectation that that's where they should be, and they were comparing themselves to other people, even if it was kind of out of their budget. They were traveling and dressing and eating out in a way because that's who they felt that they should be, even if they couldn't necessarily afford it.
Morgan, you're calling us out here, Morgan.
I'm calling everybody out.
Yes.
I've been in this situation too. There's no shame in it. This is a very common thing that I think everyone will experience. And I think a lot of why I got interested in this topic, every book that I've written started with looking in the mirror and being like, when have I been envious? When have my expectations spiraled out of control? No one is immune to this. So there's nothing to be ashamed of here.
So there's a little bit of, because, just in full disclosure, I entered my marriage with $10,000 of credit card debt that my husband did not know about, and then proceeded to hide it from him.
Yep.
But the truth is, I just walked my credit card into stores and bought stuff I didn't need with money I didn't have.
Right.
And then even if I look at what happened to my husband and I when I was 41 years old and his restaurants were going under and taking our house and our entire life savings with it, the truth is, we did spend a lot of money we didn't have.
Yeah.
We did rack up that debt. And I remember several years later, as we were starting to climb our way out, there was a level of relief when I could say to myself both, I'm responsible for this mess. I can see how I made dumb decisions at the time because I had outsized expectations for how I thought things were going to go. And admitting it to myself in a weird way made me feel like, well, if I've got the power to make dumb decisions, then maybe if I wake up and recognize that, I've got the power to make better decisions.
Yes, that's absolutely true. What happens with expectations for a lot of people is, look, if I said, I want to be a 10% better dad, that's a good goal. But what does that mean? What does that even mean? How do I track that? How do I measure? That's impossible. But if I said, I'm living in a 1-bedroom apartment and I want a 2-bedroom apartment, that makes sense. If I said, I want 3 new pairs of jeans, that's easy to wrap your head around. Money is so quantifiable. It's so easy to just say, right now I'm making $20 an hour. I want to get to 25.
Got it.
I can measure it so quickly that it becomes this thing where we chase money because it's so easy to measure. And we chase spending because it's so easy to contextualize. And so if you don't have a good idea of what a good life looks like, it's very easy to just say, a good life is one in which I have more money. Because it's so much easier to understand than, how can I become a better dad? How can I be a better parent, a better spouse, a better friend, a better worker? That's hard to wrap your head around. Will Smith had this I thought it was so astute and profound. He wrote this in his biography. He said, when he was depressed and poor, he could tell himself, if only I had more money, all my problems would go away. And that gave him hope. I just need to go out and make more money. And once I have more money, all of my depression, all of my doubts will go away. And then he became rich and he was still depressed. And then he said he lost hope because he couldn't say, if only I had more money. And so we chase money because it's so easy to wrap our heads around. And we chase it with the idea that it's the solution to all of our problems, even if it can solve some problems, but not the biggest ones. The hole that you're trying to fill, the psychological hole that you're trying to fill, is probably not going to be filled with money.
So the takeaway that I've got from what you just shared, which is much deeper, is that if you're sitting there listening and you're saying, I'm so behind, I'm so behind, I'm so behind, there's 2 things to do. First of all, you're in the right place because we're going to be learning from you exactly what to do, Morgan. And one of the first things you said is it's not too late because there are simple, you even said kindergarten level behavior changes that you can make that will help you be good with money. But the deeper thing to ask yourself is, what is the hole that money is trying to fill for me?
Yes.
And are there things that I can do right now in terms of redefining what it means in my 20s or my 60s to be a good friend or to have a good life or to take better care of myself that don't involve hitting myself over the head about my financial life?
Exactly. That's it.
Got it. One of the things I want to talk about before we really start unpacking some of the tactics is that at this exact moment in time, it is a really challenging moment when it comes to money, finances, the job market. If you really identify with that sense that I'm actually scared. I'm
Yeah.
scared I can't get a job. I'm scared about being able to make it. Where do you start, Morgan?
I think if somebody says, I'm scared about my money,
Yeah.
that's their truth. And you have to empathize with that. If someone were to say, it is worse now than it was for previous generations, that I think you can push back on a little bit more. And you can
How
say,
so?
because you could look back at how people lived in the 1950s, in the 1960s, in the 1970s, and say, look, I empathize with how scared you are today. It is probably not true that we are worse off today than we were in previous generations. You know, one thing that I've always thought is very interesting is if you ask most Americans, when was peak middle class prosperity? When were the glory days? A lot of people
Late
will point
70s.
to the 1950s is what they'll point at as peak middle class prosperity. But what's interesting is that if you looked at how the average middle class family lived in the 1950s and who we are aspiring to want to go back to, it is a quality of life that we would consider abject poverty today. I mean, the average middle class family house in the 1950s was about 800 square feet for 2 bedrooms for you and your 4 kids, no air conditioning, no washer and dryer, no, go on down the list of what it was like back then. They were very happy. They were very content with it back then, but it's not a level of contentment that you would have today. And so a lot of what is with finance is that it's not necessarily that these things will make you happier. If you were to have more money, it's not necessarily that you would be happier. And that when most people think, oh, if only I had a bigger house, then I'd be happy. And when you imagine yourself taking a fancy vacation, you imagine how happy you would be. The emotion that you're actually thinking about is not happiness, it's contentment. If I imagine myself in Hawaii with my kids next year, and I'm just envisioning that in my head, I can come up with this emotion inside and be like, oh, that would be great. I would be so happy with that. But
Right.
actually, the emotion that I'm envisioning is being content with that. It's being in Hawaii and saying, this is enough. This is all I want. I don't want anything else. What actually happens to people if they do go to Hawaii with their kids is they're sitting on the beach and they say, if only I had stayed at the nicer hotel. If only we had stayed for a couple days longer. If only we had eaten at the nicer restaurant last night. How come those people got a better room? How come they got better beach chairs? And so you're not actually content with the experience that you're having. And so when you realize that what you're actually chasing is contentment, you're not chasing more. You're chasing I just want to be happy with what I have. The first step
Yep.
is realizing that a lot of your money woes and a lot of what you're feeling in terms of falling behind and
Yep.
a lot of your gap between what you have and what you want is solely a factor of your expectations.
What if you don't think you're good with money, though? Like, because for a long time, I had a story in my head. I'm just not good with money. Like, I'm bad with money. And let's say you're somebody who's gone through a divorce, you're financially wrecked, you gave all the power to your partner, now you're starting over. Can anyone get good with money for real?
You can if you want to. And I think the people
Oh.
who say, I'm not good with money, don't want to be. They use that as their excuse to
How so?
say,
Come on now. Really?
I think that they use that as their excuse. This is not a difficult thing to wrap your head around. This is very basic arithmetic. Spend less money than you make, save the difference, be patient. That's it. This is what we're talking about. You can explain this to a 5-year-old. And so if you're saying I'm not good with money, you're making a choice to not get better. Nothing is easier than bad financial habits that you want to have. Like, we live in a society that it's very easy to overspend. A lot of people are willing to give you credit cards, give you debt. It is very easy to have bad financial habits. And if you want those, that's an easy thing to do. As soon as you actually want it, this is not a difficult thing for anybody.
This conversation reminds me of something that I saw a musician say. I wish I could remember who it was, but I saw a musician saying, everybody loves it when I tell the story about how I had to live in my car for a year while I was just starting out, but nobody actually wants to live in their car for
Nobody
a
ever
year
wants to do it.
while they're starting out.
Right. And so a lot of these things for people who are in debt, you are one of these people, you can empathize with this, I know, is that, yes, it's going to be a sacrifice to get out of this. This might require a downshift in lifestyle relative to what you are used to. And so for a lot of people who say, I'm not good with money, I think what they're actually saying is, I don't want to make the sacrifice. I'm unwilling to make the sacrifice to do it. And I think that is true. Now, what is true, the reason that you like the story about the guy living in the car is because I think people actually love stories, or doing this themselves, of suffering for a noble goal. I think this is true in so many aspects of humanity, that it's not that people, like, humans are very willing to suffer and put in hard work and sweat if the goal is noble enough.